Hey everyone, Jason here from DBHQ. Today we're doing something a little different. I'm taking all the major practice techniques that I can think of at least and ranking them from S to F in a tier list. S tier is the absolute best technique that every bassist should use regularly. A tier is excellent and highly effective. B tier is good and useful. C tier is average, has its place, but it's limited. D tier is below average, not really worth your time. And F tier is actually maybe harmful. I've been teaching and performing for years, and I've tried all of these methods extensively, both for myself and with my students. So let's dive in. We dig into topics like this and more each week in our email newsletter. If you're not on the list, consider subscribing. Links in the description below. Technique number one, slow practice that is going into the S tier. Absolutely, totally essential. Slow practice is absolutely fundamental. No matter what you're working on, you could probably slow it down a little more than you are. And I had a wonderful conversation with Brendan Fitzgerald for my podcast. This was about a year ago. I will drop a link to the complete conversation, but it was so fun to hear how he practiced, and he shared this great story of the realization that everybody has at some point that slow practice is the key and that their teacher was right all along. When you practice at extremely slow tempos, you can focus on accuracy, intonation, bow control, all those important things. It's like examining your playing under a microscope, and it's just impossible to do this at first at faster speeds. You can combine it with metronome work, that's what I usually do, or you can freely do it. All depends on what you're practicing in the context, but it is absolutely S tier in my opinion. Jumping in without any technical routine and just sort of hacking or slashing your way through the repertoire, that might work for some people, it doesn't really work for me. Recording yourself, another S tier technique, and I am so guilty of not recording myself as much as I should. I try to make this a daily practice. I use a practice app called Modacity, and right front and center in the app is this recording icon. And I don't press it as often as I should, but I try to press it at least once a day, and I'll record something, even just 30 seconds is fine. A scale or an etude, that's what I frequently do when I listen back and, of course, hate everything about what I hear. Not everything, but then think about what could be better, try to do it again, record, and hear some progress. And there are many, many different ways that you can record. You can break out, of course, high-quality microphones. You can video record yourself. You can do this really cool technique that Jeremy Kurtz-Harris and Aaron Blick, both from the San Diego Symphony, demoed. It's called distance monitoring. They did a whole 45-minute video on it. I will link up to that. Absolutely watch that and follow Jeremy if you're not. His channel is awesome. But recording forces you to confront reality. Inhale deeply at what you're putting out into the world and love it or hate it. That's what it is. It's objective. Might not be fun, but it is absolutely S tier in my opinion. One method I didn't list here, but it's kind of because I think of it as an Uber method to kind of apply to everything, is deliberate practice. And I've gone quite extensively into deliberate practice on this channel. I'll link up some resources. And this app, Modacity, that I use for practicing, it is built with deliberate practice in mind. Fascinating topic, and I think that being deliberate about your practice can apply to any of these sub-techniques that have been listed here. Chunking and isolation, that is S tier for me. In other words, breaking things down. And Nathan Cole, who's now concertmaster of the Boston Symphony, he's put out some great content over the years about simplifying things, which is really what we're doing when we're chunking and isolating. Nathan describes trying to make it so that you're succeeding almost 100% of the time when you're practicing. So simplify the task so that you can be playing really well with almost everything you're doing. Doing something successfully and screwing something up both imprint themselves in your mind, love it or hate it. And if you can have wins, if you can have successes, even if they're really simple, just like going from A to B or something like that, or doing a little shift and then building on that, that will lead so much better and healthier and more musical results. So chunking, taking little bits and just finding successes in little bits, that is an S tier technique. It's something that you keep developing your entire life. The longer you play, the more you understand how to do this. But chunking and isolation is absolute S tier in my opinion. A few general thoughts about practicing. It's so common to start at the beginning and then go to and make a mistake and then go back to the beginning. And so what happens is we frequently have a descending level of quality graph throughout the piece. So a simple thing, especially when we're chunking, is to start somewhere besides the beginning. I will go through in my music and I will actually put some slashes and I'll break the music up into chunks just to make sure that I'm not always practicing the same thing every day, and keeping some sort of tally on the music, like what I do each day, can be helpful. Again, if I get too obsessed with tracking everything, it's detrimental. So just keeping a little bit of organization and making sure that I'm not starting at the beginning and going until I crash every single time. Onto the A tier. These are excellent techniques. Those Desert Island S tier techniques, I'm going to go to those every day. I'm going to go to the A tier techniques almost every day. And the first one is metronome acceleration. It is not rocket science, but put the metronome on and just edge it up to the goal tempo. A great place to start with just about any passage, not every passage, but just about any passage, is to take it to half tempo. And if it's still challenging, take it down below that. And there are many different ways to do this. Old school metronomes, or I really like Tonal Energy, the app that's got a metronome and it's got a tuner, it's got all sorts of things. I use that every single day. I find it to be super useful. And you can practice with the metronome in very different ways. You can have just good old click on the downbeat, that works. You could put the click and have it be on the offbeat, no matter what the style, that's very useful. You can have subdivisions. I will frequently find myself practicing with 16th notes on or triplets on, and then just eighth notes, and then back to quarter notes, and even recording myself while I'm playing with the metronome. I'm always amazed at how I am so bad at rushing, and so just trying to stay honest, and the metronome keeps you honest. That's one thing. If you can have the discipline to go with the metronome and not just jump ahead and try to barrel through something, but really find the tempo where you've got it, no problem. Maybe take it even a little lower than that, and then work it just until you get into what I'd call like the yellow zone, where things are just a little bit challenging. If you're the type of person that likes writing things down, writing down the goal tempo, writing down the tempo that you're starting at, writing down the tempo that you made it to that day can be real motivating when you look at a passage and over the course of, say, a week, you realize you've gotten it from 60 to 86 or whatever the number is. That can be great. This technique works, and I find that if I'm working something up long term, which can be great, let's say I'm trying to get a passage of 16th notes to 120 beats per minute, if I start at 60 and then I get to 80 the first day, maybe the next day I'll go back, not all the way to 60, maybe I'll go to like 64 or 65 or 68, however regular you like your numbers, and then work at it from there. So you're going almost back to square one, but not quite. And then every day you just kind of like build this staircase of incremental tempo increases. Drone practice is also solid A tier. I use a drone pretty much every day, and I prefer, in most cases, to drone on the fifth. Because if you're playing with it on the root, that's great, but then you have this half-step clash with the root and the seventh, and the fifth doesn't have any half-step clashes in most cases, and I find it to be super duper useful. I'll put a drone on scales, I'll put a drone on when I'm practicing Bach, I'll put a drone on for orchestral music as well, and it just is wonderful for keeping you honest and giving you something to base your intonation off of. Metronomes and drones are just so incredibly useful, and I have either a metronome or a drone or both on for, I would say, at least half of my practice time. I don't always want both of those on, and I don't always want to have the metronomic framework. Sometimes I find it helpful to just take whatever piece I'm working on and basically put a fermata on every single note. So I just kind of get the left hand structure and framework for the piece and don't worry about rhythm or anything like that. That can be very helpful for a string player especially, but that kind of falls into the slow practice category in this list. Looping and repetition, that is A tier for me as well. And you want to make sure when you're repeating something, practice, as so many people say, doesn't necessarily make perfect, practice makes permanent. So what you are practicing is leaving an imprint, just like Nathan Cole talks about succeeding pretty much all the time when you're playing. When you're repeating something, you want to make sure that you're repeating in a quality way. I don't know that setting a specific number of repetitions is necessarily or even helpful for a lot of people. I know many bass players and other instrumentalists do find it helpful, try to get to 10 repetitions or 20 repetitions. I generally don't do that, but I just will repeat until I feel like it's getting into my nervous system and long-term memory and bloodstream. And I am not shy about taking breaks, especially when I'm doing repetition work. Maybe repeating something 2 or 3 times, putting the bass down, getting a glass of water, going outside, looking at this, not into the sun, but getting some sun, and then coming back to the instrument and doing a few more repetitions, coming back the next day and doing a few more repetitions. Mindful repetition, this technique, A tier for sure, just use it wisely. Rhythmic variations are huge, and Jeff Bradisich, the wonderful bass teacher and a big influence on me, he introduced these 7 rhythmic variations that you can apply to just about any passage. And if you just take the first 2 as an example, you go short, long, short, long. Well, what you're doing is you are playing 2 notes quite quickly, and then you're giving yourself a thinking pause and going on to the next 2. So you're practicing at tempo half of the music. Really effective way. And then if you do the second one, you go long, short. And the other ones are just variations like that. But doing rhythms, it all of a sudden makes practicing a little more like a game. It makes you focus on different shifts and different string crossings and different aspects of the fingering. It makes you look at passages in a really 3-dimensional way. I don't always do this, but I often do this, particularly with something that has some complexity to it. Definitely an A-tier technique. I do this almost every day. I think of practicing like puzzle solving and looking at any particular passage as some sort of challenge that has a key, and I just have to figure out what that key is. And the more methods you have at your disposal, the more keys you have to try to unlock your potential and unlock the techniques in any particular passage. Now we get to the B tier. These are good and useful. I will do these once in a while. The first B tier for me is using the metronome and the drone together. I find both are helpful, and I do frequently practice with a metronome and a drone. I might not do this or advise this if you're new to bass, because it's kind of overwhelming. You're trying to focus on staying with the metronome, and then you're noticing how out of tune you are, likely, with the drone, and it can kind of be a lot. So practicing just with the drone or just with the metronome can sometimes yield better results, and maybe alternating between the two, then doing both. But I know a lot of people that do both, including me. I do both quite a bit. Then there's singing your part, and I think singing is great. Singing through and thinking about phrasing and melodic lines is great. It's a little bit of a cliche on bass. What's the melody of that one? Boom, 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 boom. And the register of the bass can be so low that it can be hard to match that exact pitch. Singing can be great, especially when thinking through phrasing. It's a B tier. It's solid. Another great one that I use a lot of the time is hands separate practice. And this goes back to that breaking things down S tier technique. This is just eliminating some of the variables. Just practice the string crossing. I find that to be particularly helpful. I don't usually just practice left hand because I can't hear anything, but I will sometimes if I'm working vibrato. I'll take the bow away and just make sure that the mechanism over here is working well, or if I want to think through a fingering, maybe I won't use the bow. But boy, just eliminating the left hand and thinking about string crossings can be great. I was just doing that last week for Daphnis and Chloe, the wonderful Ravel piece. We had this crazy bit that was on the E and A strings, and I realized it wasn't nearly as complicated as I thought if I just practiced the string crossing. Then there's score study, and that's great. I think it's a solid B tier. It is good, it is useful. Depending on your stage of development, might not be so critical, but I find particularly when I'm getting ready to play a solo recital, or if I'm playing something in orchestra and I really want to understand what's going on, besides listening, obviously, looking at the part and looking at the entire score can be quite helpful. And there's probably a phase in your life where this can be very helpful. I used to take my bass parts to Borders, Books, and Music. That'll take us back a couple decades, and I would get a cup of coffee and I would just go through and study the parts, and this will tie into another technique that's in this list later. But I do find that just studying the score can be quite helpful. Definitely a B tier in my opinion. And there's practicing with backing tracks or recordings, depending on if you're talking about jazz or other styles of music. And I do this a lot. I was just doing this for last week, preparing this Bartók Violin Concerto and Daphnis and Chloe, and I was doing score study at the same time for those. So they are helpful. Do I do this every day? No. Though I have been using the app Quartet, which I recently reviewed. I'll drop a link to that. And that's been great for my jazz practice, having something to play along with. So depending on if you're a jazz player, this might be A tier, might even be S tier. For me, backing tracks are a B tier. I use them every once in a while, though I am using them every day now with the app Quartet, and super useful, especially just not being a lonely bass player playing bass parts by yourself. It's fun to play with other, quote unquote, other people, even if you don't have other people around, and that's where backing tracks or recordings can be really useful. Finally, there are articulation exercises. Whether we're talking about pizzicato or we're talking about the bow, practicing your articulation is like practicing your diction. It's sharpening the blade. It's incredibly important, especially if you're working on bow strokes for orchestra excerpts or that kind of thing. I do it just about every day. Is it essential, especially if you're earlier on in your development? Maybe not so much, though I do think that bass players benefit particularly from practicing articulations. And I actually did an entire video on articulations, and I'll link up to that here if you want to dig deeper into the topic. No matter what methods you're using, I think that breaks are so essential, and I'm a big fan of doing maybe 25 minutes, then taking a break. I've gotten deep into that on my podcast, and I'll find some resources to link up to there. But I do think that having intense focus and then being very deliberate, but I do find that having a very intense focus and then deliberately taking a break can be really helpful. And when I take that break, I put the bass down, I get up, I take a walk, I play with the dog, get a drink of water, shake it out, stretch out, anything like that. And then I come back. Just that little mini break is just enough to refocus. I make sure that I'm not holding tension anywhere unnecessarily. I find that absolutely critical to, I find that absolutely critical to making progress. If you learn something with unnecessary tension or making the same mistake over and over, practice makes permanent. You are ingraining that. Now we're into C tier. These are, in my opinion, average. They have their place. They could be helpful to you depending on where you're at in your development. And these are probably all hot takes. I'm going to start with one that I used to be a lot more into than I am now, and that's pre-planning. Yeah, I was so into this when I was younger. I would have a notebook and I would write down the order of everything that I was going to practice. And I still do this to an extent in this app, Modacity, which is much looser. And for me, it's more just having some momentum so I don't have to think about what I'm going to practice. The app works great because I'm not spending so much time planning it out. For me, planning too much, my practicing, kind of leads to paralysis and then disappointment in myself when I go off track. So I've found, but having absolutely no plan also isn't great for me. So I do some pre-planning, but really what I do is I have my Modacity practice list, and I'm linking up to a lot of videos in this one, but I'll link up to a video about Modacity and how I use it. I found it to be really helpful. It's just kind of like a playlist on Spotify or something, but of the things you're going to practice. And I'll move those around from time to time, depending on what's coming up. It's just a way to keep me a little bit organized, but not straitjacketed. Now this one probably is a hot take, but visualization and mental practice. I do think this is important. I have done a lot of this in my life. I used to be really deliberate about it as well. I think mental practice is a technique that works great when you're a little more experienced, and especially if you have something coming up like an audition or an important performance, to just zoom out and almost imagine that there's like a drone circling you and you're like watching yourself play. I do find it to be helpful from time to time. I'm not as deliberate about it as I used to be. I find that mental practice kind of slips in whether I want it to or not during the course of the day. It's like I do my physical practice on the bass, which also involves a lot of mental activity. And then when I'm walking the dog or doing the dishes or cooking or at the gym or something, I will kind of solve some passages or think through something, but I'm much more organic about it. It just kind of fits into my day. If I have an hour, I am going to spend that hour on this instrument, but also probably putting it down, getting a drink, stretching it out. I find the mental focus combined with the physical aspect of the instrument to be the best. But of course, if I'm on a plane, if I'm away from the base, I don't necessarily sit down and say, I'm going to mentally practice for 20 minutes. But it is helpful. It has shown to be quite helpful for a lot of people in certain situations. And it's a great technique. It's C tier for me. Again, maybe a hot take, but it absolutely has its uses. Another C tier technique for me is varying dynamics, like if I'm working on something that's a forte passage, playing it piano, or if I'm working on something piano, playing it forte, and changing that up. I've heard that's something that is helpful for people. I've tried from time to time. I don't think it's hurting my playing, but I don't find a whole lot of benefit. So for me, varied dynamics, practicing like that, or varying the style even might fall into this, playing Mozart like Brahms, or Brahms like Beethoven, or something like that. It has its place, but definitely C tier for me. And D tier, rarely worth your time, again, in my opinion, is just jamming. Just taking out the instrument, it's like, let's jam, man. And there's nothing wrong with that, and pulling out and having fun and just kind of going. And I think from time to time, having absolutely no plan can have some benefit, but I find that that's kind of defeating I'm trying to be deliberate and improve on things when I'm sitting down with the bass. And I would kind of equate it to like going to the gym and just like grabbing a 10-pound weight and swinging it around, and then like doing a push-up, and then like doing a yoga pose, and then trying to lift a kettlebell that's way too heavy in a weird way, and then going and then walking backwards on the treadmill. I'm being intuitive, man. I'm jamming. Yeah, but you're probably not improving in any sort of structured way. I like my practicing to be a little more structured like that, and I think I lost like hundreds of hours when I was an undergrad going over to the piano. I knew just enough to piano to get sucked in and waste all my time like playing impressionist kind of stuff. And just probably just my personality, but jamming is great and definitely has its place, but I don't really think of it as a practice technique. And F tier, I don't actually have any techniques for F tier, frankly. In my opinion, most of these practice techniques, even the C tier and D tier, aren't going to actually harm you. They might just not be the most effective way, in my opinion, to reach your goals. If I had to put something in F tier, it would probably be something like practicing without listening to yourself, or always practicing at full tempo without ever building up gradually. But these aren't really techniques, they're kind of anti-practicing techniques. So there you have it, my complete tier list of practice techniques for the double bass. In the S tier, we've got slow practice, recording yourself, and chunking in isolation. In the A tier, we've got metronome acceleration, drone practice, looping and repetition, and rhythmic variations. The B tier is metronome and drone combined, singing your part, hands separate, score steady, backing tracks, and articulation exercises. We slide into C tier with a couple hot takes. We got the pre-planning and the mental practice visualization, along with the varied dynamics. D tier's got jammin', man. And nothing really in F tier. Remember, the best practice technique is the one you're going to actually apply consistently. Start with the S tier essentials, sprinkle in some A tiers, and maybe a couple B tiers from time to time, and experiment to see what suits you, what's a nice combination that really gets you toward your goals. What do you think? Do you agree with my rankings? What would you change? What techniques would you add? Leave a comment below and let me know. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, check out what we've got linked up, and we'll see you over there.